today we're going to talk about the human brain, but probably in a way that's different than you've ever heard before. So there's a lot of talk in the lay press about the concept of neuroplasticity, or the ability of the brain to change itself. And I use that in my clinical work every day. But very few people are talking about the fact that our brains are genetically hardwired for spirituality. And when we activate those centers, we actually can change ourselves, humanity, and the world, and prevent the careening path of self-destruction that we're currently taking. So what is it that you care about? Is it your health, your family, the environment, perhaps the political state of the world, the Syrian refugee crisis and how it has the world divided instead of united? Whatever it may be, I'm here to be a source of inspiration that we have the power to improve the human condition, that power resides within ourselves. In our modern day society, we tend to look externally for the solutions to our problems, for our own happiness, for our sense of well-being. We also tend to look externally for validation, like today, on my performance, or we look for our own self-worth. But if we look back in history, in ancient cultures, realize that they knew it all along, and that the secret lies within ourselves and our ability to rise up and connect with those higher centers and change our level of consciousness. In our modern world, this is a picture of our brain, our reptilian brain, and what it's concerned about. Fight, flight, food, and fornication. Because unfortunately in this world, we are being misled, and we are being taken advantage of. We are taught to feel small and separate, and that the way to make ourselves a place in this world is to go and be competitive and to fuel ourselves on our differences rather than our shared path. We are taught to use this brain. And I might ask you, especially in light of recent events, how many politicians do you know that are coming from a place of fear or power, or perhaps making mistakes in the fornication department? And unfortunately, that's the basis of our reality. And the basis of every reality TV show I have had the great misfortune to watch. But we have the power to rise up. If we look at some of the most inspiring leaders in our history, Martin Luther King, Mandela, Gandhi, they came from this beautiful place of love and selflessness, passion. And they understood the connection between one another and the connection between the planet. And they made incredible decisions that were for the betterment of humanity. Even our most revered scientist, Einstein, in a letter to his daughters back in the 80s said, if we want our species to survive, if we are to find meaning in our life, if we want to save the world, every sentient being on it, then love is the one and only answer. Perhaps we're not yet ready to make a bomb of love so powerful it would entirely destroy the hate and selfishness and greed that just devastate the planet today. And so with this knowledge, I'm going to ask you, what are you going to do about it today and tomorrow? I began to ask myself this question in my 30s. I had several degrees. I was a smart person, full of ego and self-importance. And yet I was making bad decisions. How was this possible? And when I realized in retrospect that I was making decisions based on triggers from my past, from my unintegrated emotional, I was basing my decisions on fear, my reptilian brain. And so I realized I was an academic superstar living my life as a lizard. How incredibly depressing. I was a prisoner of my own uncontrolled thoughts. And it was at that time I realized that my brain was my greatest asset, but it was also my greatest weakness. And so my path of self-discovery began. I looked at different cultures, and I started to study a lot of the different spiritual traditions. And in medicine, I decided I'm going to study Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, and go down to the States and study functional metabolic medicine. And that eventually led me to the brain, because I figured out if we take care of the brain, we take care of the rest of the body. So what I found when I was researching the different spiritual traditions is that each one, in their own way, in their own language, had a specific set of anatomic structures, invisible, that led up to the brain. And when activated, could bring about this change in ourselves, an unbelievable feeling of connection, an outpouring of the heart for love and forgiveness and understanding. And even if you practice and are disciplined enough, some huge bliss states where it feels like you're having 1,000 orgasms and it lasts for hours. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? So, and it doesn't matter where you look, because you could look in the Indian Vedic texts, or the Yoga Sutras, or the Taoist alchemists, or the Chinese meridians, or this is more in the biblical meditation, and the Kabbalah, and the Tree of Life, and the spheres. Every religion has a pathway, and it's not necessarily religion, but let's just say spiritual path that gives us to those higher centers. So it's time for us to wake up and activate these higher centers and power up our brains. So let's look at the science. So just as Newton and Einstein studied invisible phenomena that could not be seen with the naked eye, they were able to measure the effects. And with the advances in neuroimaging today, with functional MRIs that measure blood flow, and quantitative EEGs that measure brain flow, SPECT scans, and other computerized programs, we can measure the effects of activating these centers. So I began to map the brains of great meditators. And in fact, there's a whole new field of science called neurotheology that's used to categorize these extraordinary findings. This is one of my subjects, Dr. Carlos de Leon. He spends his life trying to save the sacred oral traditions that are being lost on our planet every day as great masters pass on. And he had one of the most beautiful brains I've ever examined. So I'm going to show you a picture of us, most of us. These are beta waves. Can you kind of see that they're all like choppy and saw-like? This is us when we're paying attention, when we're focused, but it's also that crazy, busy brain that drives us nuts of what am I going to get for groceries? I'm trying to go to sleep. I can't think that. How am I going to do tomorrow? Blah, 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 blah. All this noise and chaos. And often, a lot of us, especially with all the technology and all the noise out there, and I love the previous talks about getting into nature because this is the best way to lose that. And when we have this noise, we have a sense of unease. And what I've found in my practice is if we live with that unease long enough, it becomes dis-ease. So I want you to contrast, remember this, and look at Carlos's waves. See this beautiful undulating flow? Those are alpha waves. That's the still point in the brain. Now, we can achieve that when we're in meditation or a quiet state. He's awake and he's not meditating. In other words, he's mastered the meditation in the waking state. His brain is always like that. And the beautiful part about that is not only is he calm, but he's not affected by his external environment. Nobody has the power to ruin his day because he's connected and he's happy. There were a lot of findings on Carlos's brain that I couldn't understand. So I sent the data down to the States. And a couple weeks later, I called these guys and I said, what do you think? And they said, we have never seen anything like this. This brain is not human. And I said, I can assure you it's human. But what they were referring to is that Carlos was vibrating at a frequency of 59 hertz. He had gamma waves between 53 and 59. Most of us are over here, 8 to 12. So you think, what's the big deal? He's vibrating higher. The thing is, over here, I have increased mental acuity. I get to see the whole picture. I get to make great decisions from this place. And all of my synaptic connections are working in my brain. Other people are doing this research. Eileen Lueders at the UCLA Lab of Neuroimaging has done some fascinating work looking at the gyri of the brain and found that in 8 weeks of meditation, we actually increase our external cortical structures. And at Harvard, they looked at the Hospital of Massachusetts, where they've done meditation, and they've actually so increases in gray matter, decreases in that amygdala, that's that fear and anxiety center, increases in the parts of the brain that hold that beautiful empathy. There's also Richard Davidson's work at the University of Wisconsin, and he's been working with Tibetan monks for some time now. And he's been able to demonstrate that these monks, they're very happy because they light up this beautiful part in the left prefrontal cortex that's associated with the positive emotions. And in fact, they've shown that the levels of dopamine and endorphins and serotonin are raised. All of us want that high. And I see in my practice so many times people get hooked into the path of addiction, whether it's food or alcohol or drugs, because they're trying to self-medicate their brain with this dopamine high, and they don't realize that our bodies are pharmacological warehouses, and that if we know how to do it, we can access it and have this high, all on our own. So this brings me to another brain that I studied. His name was Bill. He was a retired 80-year-old professor. Halfway through the test, that's Barbara on the left. Halfway through the test, I had to stop it because I said, your brain has not aged. You have the brain of a 20-year-old. Because you see, at 320 milliseconds, we're 20. At 400 milliseconds, we're demented. We only have 100 milliseconds in brain speed to lose in our lifetime. And if we don't do anything about it, every decade of life, we get a little slower. But in fact, memory is not part of the normal aging process. And so I asked him, you have the secret. No one's going to be changing your diapers. Your physical body is going to wear out way before your brain. What have you done? And I was surprised. And he said, I've always had love in my life. And my father taught me to let stress roll off my back like water off a duck's back. And you may think, well, that's not my life. You know, he must have lived a blessed life, because I've gone through a lot of stuff. But guess what? His son committed suicide, and his first wife passed away. He had endured serious traumas, but he had learned how to activate these centers, and he was a wonderful and beautiful, happy man, still alive today. So what does all of this tell us? So if we connect with these higher centers, we feel better, our brains work faster, our brains actually get bigger physically. So it's a no-brainer. Let's get off the couch and connect. Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. These are my friends meditating in the Alps this summer from Paris, from Mexico City, from Texas. And I would say to each one of you is a critical link in the chain of consciousness that's required to change our reality and our world. So let's wake up and change our brains. I leave you with a last slide. The brain we develop reflects the life we lead. Thank you.